Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. You know, it seems like every week for the past few weeks I've been saying, this is really the last episode of the Merrily We Roll Along season. Well, I'm telling you that for real, this is the last episode of the Merrily We Roll Along season. Just to wrap everything up into a tiny little bow, we're going to be discussing Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened, the documentary on the making of Merrily We Roll Along, and kind of a catch up with the principal actors and creators involved, like 20 some years afterwards. Luke Crichton has returned back to the show to help fill out that discussion a little bit more, and I'm excited to jump into that. One thing before we do get into that conversation is something that's going to be happening on the Patreon from now on. So if you want to help support the show, it's something that I would greatly value, especially because of some things that are going to be happening very, very soon that have not been announced yet. But the Patreon would be very, very helpful for anyone who is able to lend a hand. But from this point forward, I'm going to be letting the people over on Patreon vote on what they want the Sondheim adjacent episode to be each month. So right now, people have been starting to vote for what the March episode is going to be about. The current poll is Sondheim cameos. So your choices between the new Knives Out film, his work in June Moon, his appearance in Camp. And I believe the last time I checked, the one that was in the lead was Camp, but that might have changed since the last time I checked. If you want to be involved, if you're a Patreon member and didn't even realize that was going on, you still have time. I'm going to wait until the end of the month to see what the final decision is. But going forward, at the start of every month, the people over on Patreon are going to be picking what the following month's bonus episode is going to be. So jump on over there if you haven't done so in a while. But be that as it may, it is time to talk about the best worst thing that ever could have happened.
Judy Prince, my wife, said, "Why don't you do a show about kids?" And I thought, a play you used to just love was Merrily We Roll Along.
And so he suggested to me, and I knew the play and thought it was a swell idea.
This is Steve Sondheim, everybody.
Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince, they were of course, my idols.
They were the gods of Broadway.
They were one.
There was a casting notice that they were having open calls for a new Sondheim show, and they wanted young people. Come on.
There were 5,000 people that auditioned, or more, 12,000, I think, maybe.
Steve Sondheim, Hal Prince, who else could have been in that room? Christ and Moses. Or
The good news is that...
Luke Crichton, thank you so much for coming back.
It's so nice to be back, Carl. Thank you so much for inviting me back.
The last time I think you were on was for the Sweeney Todd movie. Am I forgetting something?
Yeah, to which I just gushed so much about how wonderful it is.
Well, we have a task of talking about another movie here this time, but a documentary, so it's a little bit less bloody than the last one that we discussed. Before we jump right into discussing best worst thing that could have happened, I would like to know what your kind of statement is, I suppose, about Merrily We Roll Along.
Okay, well, I will say I arrived a little later to the Sondheim canon than I should have, so this was one of the ones that I arrived very late to. But I think I mentioned this the first time I was here. In 2021, I tried to listen to 100 new musicals to kind of broaden my, just listening of the genre and just get to know new stuff. Merrily was number 29 of 100.
Okay.
And it piqued my interest because the structure was really interesting. When I first listened to it, I had no idea what I was really listening to, apart from it's a show about three people who are working on different things. And then I read, so it's told backwards. Okay, I will keep that in mind because obviously the reprises are the other way around and all this stuff. But that interested me. And obviously that when it starts, the score just hits you and it's just fantastic. So I was like, oh, wow, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm down for this. And yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. I find myself going back to the 2012 recording the most, largely because of the quality of the sound,
that's the Encores version.
Yeah, the Encores version. I found that one to be the most, or at least for me, I can just chuck that on all
sonically enjoyable.
Yeah, very much so. But recently, researching for this, listening to the original recording, it truly is just like a moment captured in that room when they recorded it, and it has a real kind of rough around the edges quality to it, much like the Anyone Can Whistle recording as well.
Oh, yeah.
and it's, you know, they record in this big room and it feels very echoey. Oh, kind of like the Sweeney Todd recording as well, that it feels like you're actually like there in the theatre watching it. So yeah, I like Merrily. I don't love it as much as, say, something like I would take Passion over Merrily, or maybe like,
Gotcha.
you know, so some of the other ones. But
Have you seen a production of it at all, or no?
of Merrily,
Yeah.
I saw the 2013 production on YouTube, but I haven't seen a physical one. But I'd love to. That'd be terrific. Hopefully, you know, we might get a West End spot. Who knows?
Yeah,
It's
that's
probably
true.
so. Yeah, so I suppose that's kind of my introduction. I like it. I'm fairly new to it, but I mean, it's Merrily We Roll Along. It's terrific. It's got just great songs.
Yeah, at risk of sounding like a broken record, it is one where I love listening to the score of Merrily We Roll Along, and the few times I have actually sat down and watched the show, there are just points where I'm just like, yeah, I can understand why this was not as beloved at its time like it is now, sort of thing. It's a messy show that I totally understand its cult status and why people do respond to it so much, but
Yeah.
it's always going to be kind of in the middle of the pack for me as far as like full shows that I want to sit down and watch again.
Absolutely. Much like a lot of Sondheim, but especially Merrily, I find musically going, oh, that's that tune that I'd completely forgotten was underneath all of this. When you were going through the score with one of your guests, and there was a mention of the sort of main tune, like Good Thing going in, I think it was Bobby and Jackie and Jack, and I'm like, I love that one. That's my favorite song in Merrily, and I didn't even noticed it, and that's cool. It makes it worth revisiting.
Yeah, I'm often reminded, like, Sondheim was pretty self-effacing about this type of thing, but I remember an interview that he had here just a few years ago, and he was up on stage. He was talking about Sweeney Todd specifically, where he's like, listen, I'm kind of a lazy composer in that I come up with a few themes, and then all I do is either, well, I can make that an octave higher, or I can kind of reverse this, or I can play around a little bit with it, and then everyone labels you a genius. So, I mean...
Yeah, no, it's
which is
a good technique.
It's very true in Sweeney Todd, because the more you pick that apart, it's like, oh, that's that theme again, just slowed down, or it's that theme sped up, or inverted, or whatever it happens to be in that case. So it's constantly a score that's referencing itself the more you dig deeper into it.
Yeah.
I think that Merrily is basically just as complex, where there's a few different themes that get played consistently throughout the show. And the more you pick up on that, it's like, oh, well, that adds another cool layer to this song that I had not considered before.
It makes revisiting every time like, oh, it's like I'm hearing it for the first time again, in a way. And it also makes those reprises more heartbreaking. I remember when I first listened to Not a Day Goes By, I was like, oh, this is quite pretty. And then you go back and you're like, oh my God. And my heart just breaks. Poor Beth.
Yeah, poor
Beth.
Beth.
Mary, actually, to be fair. We do need to, poor Mary as well.
I'll pour one out for her here as we're recording. So, of course, we've kind of detailed a little bit. I guess we haven't gone like super in depth with the behind the scenes turmoil of Merrily We Roll Along, other than to say, like, this is a pretty fantastical flop at the time. Last 16 performances. The Sondheim Prince partnership breaks up because of this show. They kind of split off and do their own things. Many of the people who are cast in the show, like some of them do have very long and fruitful careers. Jim Walton, for instance, who I got to talk to, I mean, just recently was in Come From Away and has been in a bunch of other productions throughout his career. Lonnie Price, of course, went on to be an actor, but also basically is more well known as a director here now.
Yeah.
The story behind this show, I think, often supersedes the actual show itself, or at least it did, I think, for many, many years.
Yeah.
How much of that did you know before watching this documentary?
Again, when researching into, doing my 100 musicals and sort of going like, okay, what's the plot? Immediately, you look underneath and it's like, here was the flop. It did 16 performances and then just, it just vanished and Sondheim went into a deep depression and then obviously went into Sunday. And obviously, I think I knew about Merrily because I had already gotten into Sunday, because Sunday was kind of the fallout of it. But obviously watching this, because I've now seen the documentary twice, hearing it now in context with everybody talking about it, what is so baffling now is it's almost like it couldn't have failed. You've got like Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince at the top of their game, doing things like Evita and Pacific Overtures and everything, and then this happens and just it's just quite baffling that this it's the worst thing that could have possibly happened, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things I'm going to bring up here that I wish that the documentary had kind of leaned into a little bit more.
Okay.
The subtext that they don't really go into, at least from what I've read and like the books on Sondheim go into a little bit more detail on, is the fact that there seemed to be an eagerness amongst some people in the theatrical community that wanted this to fail.
Yeah.
And so there's almost a giddiness to it. So maybe some of the reviewers maybe leaning a little bit heavy on their criticism. The word of mouth might have been a little bit too happy that this wasn't just a smooth sail into production. And yes, I think that there are some fundamental things that even in that initial production that I don't think really work theatrically. Let's just put it that way. I guess we can debate on whether or not we think the shirts were a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think Hal Prince and Stephen Sondheim have both said that probably casting the kids was the wrong choice ultimately, but that is kind of why they wanted to make the show.
Yeah.
You know, there's things that can be leveled here and there. But I think that this underscore here is like, hey, you've been super successful here throughout the 70s. Maybe the productions haven't run like thousands of performances, but enough to like people know who you are. You're making money. People love you. These are daring, bold works. And now this one hits, and now we get to like rub our hands together because it's a pretty spectacular failure.
Yeah. In doing the research for this, I wonder if anything to do with the coverage on the little local ABC show Close Up did anything for this. If people saw it,
Right.
And when, saw those little kind of bits, or even some of the coverage that they just had on the news and thought, yeah, it's that Schadenfreude like thing. I think that's mentioned by Lonnie Price in one of the interviews that he did when the documentary came out. There is the kind of want for, somebody rising so high to just fall. And especially nowadays, I mean, the moment anybody does something just slightly, or perhaps a movie doesn't do as well as it should have done, or a show doesn't do as well as it should have done, everybody just suddenly turns.
I was going to bring this up too, which is there's this weird thing, I'm sure people have written about this, there's this phenomenon that happens, I think, that a certain narrative, if it starts early, can just like overtake a show. And what usually happens is that the idea gets planted in people's head. This is a disaster. This isn't going well. And then that's the narrative until 15 years later where it's reassessed and people are like, actually, you know what? This is actually pretty decent. Why didn't anyone show up for this thing? You see it all the time. And I think Merrily proves that point, which is like, it found its audience. It just took a decade. And then people are like, actually, you know what? This is actually a pretty decent show.
It is good. And I especially trying out something. Let's bring in the conversation of having costumes and stuff being, the best friend and things like that. They're bold strokes. They're really bold strokes. And to do that and to really kind of do a show, my Broadway history is not amazing. So I don't know if this has ever truly been done before like a narrative that is, reversing.
I mean, like the original play it's based on did the exact same thing. I'm trying to think of a musical that may play around with time a little bit like this, but nothing is popping up. I'm sure there probably is something that plays around with time a little bit.
Might be something. I can't think of it right now, but yeah, it was a bold move. And again, I kind of coming back to that, like it almost seems like this was going to work. It was like the perfect team. But then that does happen with movies as well. You have this kind of, we've got this actor, we've got this, this writer doing this, and we've got this property. What could possibly go wrong? And then the thing comes out, and you can't always judge.
It proves the rule, right? Like nothing is ever guaranteed.
No.
Other people have said this exact same thing about how it's kind of a miracle, whether it is a movie or a play or a musical. It's kind of a miracle that anything ever just gets made, full stop. And then for it to be good is like another miracle on top of that. Like there's so many moving parts that you have to kind of keep organized that it's a miracle when anything is actually something that is like well thought of at the time.
It's true. And now we live in an age of nostalgia where something from 20 years ago, even if it's not the best thing ever made, now has a new audience that say, oh no, this was a classic, or it just didn't have its moment because of X, Y, Z. And now obviously, I'm thinking about the nostalgia thing because obviously this documentary centers around the looking back and feeling kind of warm and fuzzy about certain aspects of this. And
the other show that is somewhat similar as far as like the nostalgia bit, although a kind of a corrupted version of nostalgia, is Follies.
Yeah.
And honestly, the critical reception of that was pretty divisive too at the time, where it's like, I don't know about this, and like this seems to be just a bunch of pastiche songs, and there's nothing memorable about this, and there's no real resolution to it. And then in 10 years from then, it's like this landmark considered one of the best musicals of all time, sort of thing. So this is such a Sondheim thing where he's always like a few years ahead of the game.
It's true. It's true.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hey everyone, just Kyle breaking into the conversation here to tell you about some of the people and organizations that help this show continue to go. You know, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and a review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's of course greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. You should also give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon. That's Jack, Todd, Robert, Louise, Christopher, Stephen, and Derek. Putting together as a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This week we're brought to you by StoryHive, so calling all new and emerging content creators in BC and Alberta. In case you haven't heard of StoryHive, they have been supporting storytellers in Western Canada since 2013. This year, they're celebrating their 10th anniversary with their biggest edition yet. The StoryHive Anniversary Documentary Edition is funding 80 short documentaries on any local story you were passionate about. You could get $20,000 in production funding, training, and mentorship, plus distribution on TELUS Optic TV and Stream Plus. If you live in BC or Alberta and you have an idea for a short documentary, now is the time to send in your pitch. Send in your application by February 28th at storyhive.com/apply. Your story, your narrative. This week we're also brought to you by the Edmonton Community Foundation. The foundation acts as a bridge between donors and charities to create a strong, vibrant community for generations to come. You can start an endowment fund yourself or with a group. Once it reaches $10,000, it can start distributing funds. Vital Signs is an annual checkup conducted by the Edmonton Community Foundation in partnership with Edmonton Social Planning Council to measure how the community is doing. Learn more by going to ecfoundation.org.
Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I always get the name wrong. Best Worst Thing That Ever Could Have Happened is a documentary. Comes out in 2016, directed by Lonnie Price, the original Charlie Kringus. And he says that straight up is like, listen, director here now, have never directed Merrily We Roll Along, thought I should do it, and then decided to make this documentary kind of at the same time as I was going through that process. When was the first time you watched this?
I saw this. I've got it marked on Letterboxd. I think it was about a year ago. Yeah, because I think I saw Best Worst Thing. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the title now as well.
It's the ever that throws me off. It's the best worst thing that ever could have happened.
Ever could have happened, yeah. I saw that, and then I think I saw the Maria Friedman 2013 production.
Right.
Basically in the same week, because I needed to know kind of what really went wrong. It's a shame that shows aren't regularly recorded in that way, because it gives a lot of context. You know, when listening to musicals back in 2021, you have to kind of, I had to sort of be like, apart from Googling what the plot was, I had to be kind of like, okay, I think I know what is happening here. Sometimes a cast recording is clear and sometimes it really isn't.
Just like you, I also use Letterboxd. So I have I know exactly when I watched this the very first time. So like I said, it came out in 2016. I watched this for the first time in May of 2018. So just a couple of months before this podcast actually launched, because I was doing some research and watching some Sondheim documentaries. And to be brutally honest, even though I knew much of the songs from Merrily at the time, didn't really know the history of it all that much, so this was nice to kind of fill that in. So yeah, I've seen this 3 times now since that time. Just as an overview, thoughts on the documentary? What are your immediate thoughts?
Well, I like it a lot. What I really like about it is the structure. I like especially the use of the archive footage, which at the time was missing, until they eventually found all of the archive footage in a mountain in Connecticut or something due to bad filing. Is ridiculous. But I suppose if this ABC show Close Up wasn't really doing a lot of other like segments on musicals. I guess there was like, well, we'll call this one Broadway and we'll put it over there and, you know,
Right.
pay no mind. I love the structure. I love the way that there's not really a lot of narration, whereas in certain documentaries, like a Michael Moore documentary or something,
Oh, sure.
he'll do a lot of voiceover and then it will be following him around and whatnot. But with this, it was just, we're relying on a lot of the interviews and then we cut back to the archive and the structure of it from who each fundamental person involved is. I like that it starts with Stephen Howe and it bookends with it being dedicated to them, which I think is really...
Yeah.
I like that it's not just like, where are they now? Like it wasn't just, we found all these cast members from this show that failed. What do they look like? It's like those kind of clickbait ads, you know.
Sure.
Where
are they now? Yeah.
Haley Joel Osment looks older. Who'd have thought?
Aging? Question mark.
Aging. Yeah. But I like the framing of, we cut to the archive stuff and then we have the score underneath. Even we have like not a missing song, a cut song, I think. Jim Walton plays one of the cut songs, which I think is really...
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Like, when they go and meet him at his, like, current day apartment or whatever, yeah, he's playing Honey. Like, that's what he's playing on the piano, which I think is really funny.
And even, again, like, it's so... With this show especially, because of who is involved and what the show is about and the lyrics and whatnot, like, it's so weird how... Is prophetic the right word? I don't know, like, how it ties in with the modern day kind of feeling of growing up and getting up. Like it's almost, there are so many weird coincidences with this show happening, the fallout of it, and then them coming back to make this documentary. I think Lonnie Price talked about it as like, it was like he was fated to actually make this documentary in the end.
You're right in saying like there's really not much voiceover. There's like 2 or 3 instances, I think, really. But at the very beginning, there is one piece of voiceover that I actually quite like, where Lonnie Price states the fact that you can only live a life going forward, but only understand it by looking backwards.
Yeah.
Which is true about the fallout of Merrily We Roll Along. Because as it kind of shows, it's like there's the original Broadway cast and the feelings that the cast members had from that, but then also the intervening 30 plus years, because it is now beloved by so many people. Was not at the time, but is now. And so like, how does that happen? You know, like to take the quote, like, how did we get to be here? Like, how did this happen where it's beloved now, but was not at the time? And I think so much of it is great. Like I think the first, 45 minutes of this documentary are its absolute strongest, where it's kind of just taking you step by step through the process of the casting of where everybody was, how they got cast in the roles, seeing that behind the scenes, like rehearsal footage, the young kids like saying, this is what I think is going to happen to me in the future sort of thing. And even having like Sondheim and Prince kind of go through and deliberate what they think went wrong, what was going right, what their feelings were at the time. All that stuff I love seeing like the behind the scenes of how something gets made. And then it does move into like, okay, so fails. Now we're coming basically to present day type of thing. I think there is some compelling stuff with that. I think this is where it's sort of loses its focus almost. I know that ultimately this is a documentary about literally like this thing happened, what's going on now, whatever, the benefit concert, kind of a wrap up. That's kind of the progression we're going through. But what happens for me, this is such a me thing, is that each of the cast members they go to, so we basically have Jim Walton, we have Ann Morrison. Lonnie doesn't really talk about it himself because he's the documentarian.
No, he doesn't.
So I think that's a bit of a miss. But then you have Terry Finn and Jason Alexander. Those are kind of the 4 that they focus on the most, and each one of their stories I think is super fascinating. Like I kind of want to know more about them and their journey and what they've been up to sort of thing, because they kind of like drop these little pieces of information like you could actually expand on that, because I kind of want to know more information about what you just said there.
Absolutely.
So it's almost like it's fast forwarding through so much information for me that's like, oh, but I want to know more about that. It's
like a small, we get only kind of a small snippet from each person. You're so right about the kind of, you could just do a whole documentary about that, like Jason Alexander talking about that he had members of the Jewish mob at his bar mitzvah.
Yeah,
that's
I'm like, sorry,
wild.
Stop.
I love that.
But even I do find Terry Finn's admission, I guess, about like her career post Marilee, like how she just felt adrift and like didn't know what she was doing. It's like, I don't know. I think so many people understand what that feels like. And I like just her frankness, to be perfectly honest. I was like, yeah, like if someone offered me a role, yeah, of course I take it. I love acting, but I'm not going to break down Adora. Like I'm just not, that's not me as a person anymore. So
that's something I've got noted here is the sort of, I like the theme of, ironically, like the show Merrily We Roll Along focuses on adults looking back, played by kids. And the documentary follows those kids now as actual adults reflecting.
Right.
Like it works very nicely.
It totally works really nicely because it is really what Marilee is all about. And so when they're kids being cast in that show and being so optimistic about the future for the most part, now they're a bit cynical adults looking back, but the show wouldn't work if you're cynical. Like I think that's the interesting part. Those kids were so excited to be part of that. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to, I'm so optimistic about the future. And then there is adults like, this is why those kids were wrong. Let me tell you why. So they've actually lived the entire journey of their characters inside of the show, but outside of the show. There's
something that I wanted to mention actually with the way we see them in a very specific order, because at some point, usually, well, like I think it is, yeah, we're in at least the act 2, I guess, of the documentary. Terry's being very frank about everything. And one of the big themes in this is coping with change, like dreams that didn't pan out or dreams that changed. And there's some of the quotes that I pulled from her here that I really like is when she gets very caught up in the moment and she says, young people don't know the choices that they're making. And there's only so much that, like me, myself, I can reflect on. I'm 24, so I have nothing. I have so I can reflect on being a child. Every 5-10 years, you kind of get to a point where you go like, that tiny decision that I made, doing, a tiny little thing. I can speak personally, I making films or something as a kid with my friends and then going, this is something maybe I'd like to do. And then going to my lecturer back in 2016 and showing a movie that I had made just for fun. And then that got me into making stuff at uni. Like it's those little, decisions.
I think it's Terry's quote too, where she talks about she wish she could go back and tell young people, or she wish she could tell young people now that you're building something.
Yeah.
Right. You are constantly building something. So few people like make something or go out in the world and are like, boom, instantly hits and everything changes for them. It all works up to be that way. And honestly, I'm reading I don't know why it's taking me so long to actually finally do this, but I'm actually reading the Meryl Seacrest biography on Sondheim right now.
Okay.
And that's so fascinating too, because so many people talk about like, he was only 25 when he makes West Side Story, but also he had been spending a lot of time creating stuff. Like that was not just his first thing that he walks in because Oscar Hammerstein refers him. It's like, no, he'd been making stuff in college and he had been rejected by a bunch of people and was writing for television and was doing this thing. And he wasn't sure if music was what he wanted to continue to do. Like there's all this stuff, but he was building something that finally he was able to like walk across that threshold and make it work. I think so many people don't realize every little step is additive to that, while also, and I'll speak for myself, with those little things, I am the worst at this of always looking back and like, if only I'd done that different, and if only I'd done that different, and then it starts to pile up and then you're just having a bunch of regrets rather than be like, okay, but also I've made this. There is this thing over here that has been going pretty good.
100%. Yeah, I feel that so much. A lot, me and my friends talk about kind of, we've had discussions about kind of regret or like this kind of thing. But the thing is with regret and tying into the show as well, like at the time you wanted to do that thing, whatever it was that went wrong or maybe didn't go the way you planned. And that's the other thing I'm currently dealing with at the moment is, I'm working on an album, myself. And I get frustrated that, it's not happening right away because these things do take time, and it's going to take time because if it doesn't take time, then it's probably not going to be worth doing. And I think Sondheim actually does say something like that in the documentary. You've got to do it, and it is going to take a long time. And that was the other thing I pulled up from Terry Finn was she's like, you have to really want it.
Yes.
And that really that hit home, and I like that. I like that a lot.
So I wrote down a bunch of little notes this time as I was doing my watch through once more. Sondheim says this really interesting thing, and I don't know why I never picked up on this on the last couple of watches, but for him, he says like the way that he was writing this score and thinking about the three main characters is that there is one working within the system, one that's working without the system, and one who gives up. Who's the one who gives up?
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Is that the Charlie character? Because that's what I'm thinking he means.
See, I don't know, because is that not is that not Mary?
Oh, sorry, that's why I said Charlie, and I meant to say Mary.
Okay.
Yes, that's Mary, right? She gives up basically at a certain point. Obviously, Charlie is the one who wants to work without, like, outside of the system. Yeah. Frank is absolutely the one who's inside. He kind of followed that up too by making this bold statement, which I also find super fascinating. He initially, I think he got to there, but initially when he was writing, did not consider this to be a show about friendship. Because it seems like that's such a central part to the narrative, right? It's about a friendship that breaks apart, or I guess comes together over time because it's backwards. Yeah,
but then there is a certain thing that Sondheim is criticized for, though, where he's seen as very cynical, and I do think that there's definitely an element of that here. But I spoke to a friend recently because he'd recently seen Sunday, and he sort of talked about how earnest it was. And going back to Merrily, there's a lot of very earnest moments. And I think one of the strongest parts of the story, at least when he was constructing it, and it's mad to think that he wasn't thinking about it like, that is a friendship, because just the little moments, here's to us who's like us. It's him doing what he does best, which is the storytelling comes first, and setting up that these people do really care about each other, even if they do butt heads, makes it the more heartbreaking when we get to the end, the bittersweet kind of ending.
One of the most earnest moments of the entire show is the song Like It Was from Mary, which is such a true feeling, I think, that so many people have at one point, where you get to a point like, can't we just go back to the way we were, fill in amount of time here sort of thing. The sad fact is, of course, you can't. You can never go back to something like it was before. It always is like the way it is currently. So I think Sondheim kind of understood that. He's in his 50s at this time, so surrounded by a bunch of people who are teens and early 20s. I'm sure that their optimism was somewhat rubbing off on him, and his maybe cynicism was rubbing off on them.
Absolutely. I'd like to go back to Merrily again and listen, or maybe just sit and read the lyrics, and also read his lyrics for Saturday Night, because I know that was his first one, and that there's a similar friendship kind of thing going on in there, and romantic partners. And I don't know because I know that when he said it, this was like the hardest score he ever had to do, because he had to go back to writing at 25.
Yeah, that's even shown in a documentary, something that I kind of kept bringing up this season, and this is where it comes from. This is where I remember it, which is like he says, it's hard to get back to simple. I'm trying to write like I did when I was 25, but I've been writing complex for so long that it's hard to think about this in simple terms. This is such a dumb thing I'm about to say, but I'm really putting the call out to everyone who's listening to this right now. There's a whole bunch of stuff in like the rehearsal period that they show in this documentary. So the behind the scenes of them rehearsing. Sondheim is wearing this sweater. It's black, and it has like these, like yellow sleeves, and has like red and white stripes and stuff on it. If anyone can find that sweater, I really want to buy it. Because I think it looks so cool, and I really want it. It's such an 80s sweater, and I kind of adore it.
It's so funny that you mentioned the sweater thing, because there's a clip with Paul Gemignani, and he is wearing that sweater. Was definitely a choice, because it's like a blue with like a yellow, and it's quite something. That's very strange. I nearly wrote that down, actually. I was like, Paul Gemignani, please wear better.
I always have to say, like, what everyone who has met the man tells me, Paul Gemignani is like the nicest person in the world. Yeah. And then like the 5-second clip you see of him in this, he seems so grumpy. Gosh, yeah. It's so weird.
Like, it's him being like, he's very much in it, and he's
in the zone.
Serious. Yeah, he's looking down at you and just kind of like getting there. That's the other thing I really loved was there is just so much archive footage here. And now obviously with stuff like Get Back or things like that, we're kind of spoiled. But in 2016, this must have been a revelation. This must have been a huge thing. And obviously nowadays, and especially since Sondheim's passing, there's been so many re-uploads of things of him like talking about jazz for 50 minutes, or like this little interview he did for the BBC, or
yeah, I'm almost convinced, like, I guess I don't know how long the footage runs for that ABC captured that they're using for their archive stuff in this. There probably is like another documentary you could make just of, you know, talking heads and things that are going on. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to pull through there and to see what little gems could be found, sort of thing. There is a story that they talk about in this where the kids that have been cast have this party, a dessert party, so everyone brings their favorite dessert. And they, like, I guess we'll invite Hal to come. And it's like, I'll bring Steve. And the idea that Hal Prince and his wife show up with Stephen Sondheim in probably like a dingy, like young kid's apartment is so funny to me, just to trying to envision that.
And it's got like all the posters of their work on the wall, his like bedroom piano, and Steve sits down and plays Good Thing Going, which again, that's one of those weird coincidences. You know, oh, here's a song from a big show that we want to do, and he sits down and he plays Good Thing Going, and then everyone applauds at the end. It's just, again, it's so weird how much of the art imitated life imitating art, like here.
Yeah. The other kind of big miss for me in this documentary, and I get that they probably were really trying to adhere to like a 90-minute format, so there's just things that just had to probably be cut out. And maybe this is just a different documentary. Maybe Lonnie Price will make another documentary that focuses just on this. But Sondheim basically states straight up, is like, listen, this was really hard for me, right? This, like, I could feel the disappointment, not just from audiences, but from the cast as well. And I felt, you know, responsible for this, to the point where I just wanted to give it all up. End of sentence. We never come back to that thought ever again. And like we see him on stage at like the reunion concert and stuff. It's like, and I'm like, well, more on that, please. Like, what did you do? What did you want to do? Because I know that he went, like, him going to go make video game music and this other ideas that he had before being pulled back in by James Lapine. I don't know. I just wanted to like follow that track a little bit about like, what did his depression make him want to do? And like, how did he like go forward with that? But perhaps that's just like a documentary on Sunday in the Park with George. That's probably where that belongs.
I can't recall which episode it is, but I do think you mentioned it before about doing like a biopic, and we start from the end, you know, from Merrily, and then we do Sunday.
When Hollywood comes calling and asks me to write a screenplay on Sondheim's life, that's what I would pitch.
Yeah, I think that'd be really good. You're so right though. There are elements that I think especially in the first half, they really revel in the joy of it, and the archive footage really shows that when Hal tells them, "Oh, the good news is you're in the show," and
so great.
Wow, it's great. We kind of lose in the second half. We don't always. Maybe it could have been longer, but then I suppose. Okay, I do want to mention actually, because of the editing. This took 9 years to make this documentary.
Right. Yeah, because the actual reunion concert. Is it 2000? 2002.
Yeah, 2002, I think.
Yeah, this documentary takes a long time to get. I'm guessing it's partly to do with funding and then finding the archival footage and going through it and like putting it all together. And you can feel the passion behind it. It's so hard. You can nitpick things all you want. The 90 minutes is probably the better thing to try and like just have a very streamlined story ultimately. But I'm usually not this person, but maybe it's just because I like the subject matter so much. If anything deserve to be like a 4 or 6 part Netflix series.
Yes.
This is the one where they could like spend the time and like really go into detail about certain things. But, you know, here we are. There's 2 last things that I wanted to mention. One, there is also always talk about how Sondheim always dressed younger than what he was, which you can kind of see in this. Again, he's dressing kind of like not necessarily a teenager, but definitely someone probably in their mid-20s to maybe early 30s in this. Yeah. But there's this great story about whether it was opening night or near opening night, and there's the group huddle, and he came running across and like jumped on top of the pile. And it's like, oh, that's such a fun image to think about. Cute.
And you can see him do it as well, because I think that was around the time when he had to kind of completely change his diet, because he went to the doctor and they were like, listen, you got to stop eating whatever you're eating, because it's
I forget what it was.
And he was like cycling around and eating better, so he's a lot thinner. But I love that. And that's the other thing, kind of coming back to what could possibly go wrong, because both Hal and Steve, in some of those behind the scenes things when they're talking with George Firth, they all seem very calm. Like, this is just standard thing. Like, we'll do the show. Oh, I need a bit more time. which was great to see Stephen Sondheim actually go, listen, like, it's not quite ready yet. Can we have a bit more time, please?
Yeah.
Which is always nice to see. There was a couple of things I wanted to mention, just in weird kind of art imitating life, etc.
Sure.
Franklin Shepherd was replaced in the musical. Now Franklin Shepherd has been replaced in the movie as well. Which is
isn't that weird?
strange.
Isn't that weird? Yeah.
Okay. I must mention this because I was listening to an interview with Lonnie Price. I think it was at 54 Below. Apparently, in the women's dressing room toilet, he was told this later, that there was a sign above the toilet bowl that said, "This is where your show is going." Apparently, that's apparently like at the theater. That's what happened. I'll send you the video.
That's awful.
He performs a little song as well that I think he'd written at that dessert party, and then Steven comes along and plays the score of Merrily, and he's like, "Oh well, maybe my song isn't that good."
I can just put that into this box over here.
The thing I wanted to mention, and I also wanted to, I wanted to mention it because I've kind of come around on The Hills of Tomorrow, because I used to be very much like, oh, it's nice that it ends with our time, it's optimistic, but it's such a great bookend that this almost feels like an epilogue Hills of Tomorrow for Merrily as like a whole thing.
Right.
Show starts, show fails, cult standing, and then reunion, documentary, all kind of...
Sorry. I want you to finish your thought, but that was the other thing.
Yeah, go on.
That I wish they had spent a little bit more time on, because it kind of is a little bit hand-waved away by the fact that it did become a cult sensation.
Yeah.
And not why it did, because it was rewritten and then the revived.
Yeah.
But they don't ever go into any of that whatsoever.
I'm surprised that James Lapine wasn't approached, because didn't he do a rewrite of it? That's very strange. But I suppose, I don't know, maybe they just couldn't get him. Maybe he was busy. I don't know. Maybe there was just getting documentaries together is tricky. But I love that Mandy Patinkin was in this for like 2 seconds, and he mentioned that he just stood at the back and watched loads of performances of Merrily.
Yeah. I'm not going to call into question him saying that. But it's one of those things, like, if everyone had come that many times, like he claims, like, this would have been like a sold out show. I had to stand in the back every single time. I was like, you didn't. I'm sorry. I call it a little bit of shenanigans with that statement, but I'm sure he saw it a lot of times. He was in New York at the time.
It's just, again, like he's just waiting in the wings. It's just so interesting of where that's to go. Oh, and Lonnie Price was involved with Pacific Overtures. Again, like, surprise.
He was working at the Prince office at the time.
He got to type script, and he was there for the cast recording. He got to be there when Mako was just doing his thing.
Doing his thing, man.
So cool. Oh, so cool. So cool. Just absolutely really watching it. Just jealous. I have one more question, but if you want to go ahead.
No, okay. Well, this is my last, like, heart-wrenching moment. Is another Terry Finn quote, which is like, oh no, sorry, it's not. This is from Anne Morrison, who says she was caught off guard when her son asked her the question, "Mom, why is it that when people say what they want to be when they grow up, they never become that?" And I was like, oh my gosh, that's a show. that's almost a show you could write. Anyways, I just think that that's such a fascinating thing, because it's often out of people's control, where it's like, I really tried and it just wasn't something that happened.
No, and you can't always predict. You can't predict where it's going to go. You just, even if you think it might fail, you got to try. And I think that is one of the messages I tried to think about when Merrily finishes, is you got to try, even if it doesn't work.
All right, what are your questions?
Okay, I got a couple questions for the end. Would you say there's been many kind of documentaries, whether they be by the BBC or it's on like morning television and things like that? Would you say this is one of the better Sondheim documentaries? Where would you put it in terms of some of the other?
I personally think so. I mean, again, I have not seen every single one, but I guess it feels more full. It has the benefit of having had time so they can look back and really reminisce about it and like actually have a thematic point to it. Right. There are some that were made like at the time something was being made that I also find interesting. I mean, of course, there's the company cast album, which is great, or original cast album. Sorry, that's what the actual documentary is called. So I guess I would say, like, as far as like artistically, probably original cast album is my number one that I've seen. But there's a great, like, it's a British documentary about the mounting of Sweeney Todd in London, which I think is really fun to see, like the behind the scenes there. there, and you actually get to see how Prince direct, which I think is a really interesting process, and him being like very clear to an actor, like, well, you can leave if you want to.
Yes.
That's your choice.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, I'm not going to mess around with this and try and like save your feelings. Like you are free to go if you want to.
Yeah.
There is that is on YouTube, and I've not watched it yet. I'm going to use that for prep for the Sunday season. There is, I think, a similar thing about them putting Sunday in the Park with George in London that I really want to check out, because that looks really, really good. But
it is good.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd probably put this at one of the top ones. How about yourself?
I would agree. I think, especially because it offers maybe not, like you say, like we could have had a bit more with, you know, some of the other Merrily cast members, but still we get like a whole narrative. Whereas something like, have you seen 6 by Sondheim?
Oh yeah, that's the other one. It's fine. I feel bad saying this because I know some people like really love that one, but it's like, I guess when you know so much about a subject, it's hard because you come in and be like, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good like overview, 6 good songs that they perform, but it doesn't like go any deeper than that.
No, I agree. It is an interesting one. It feels like it could be done kind of like Sondheim on Sondheim. 6 Sondheim could be a show, its
own show,
and with some like very interesting renditions of songs as well. But yeah, I love that Sweeney Todd documentary.
Have you watched the documentary? Because I have not been able to get a copy over here in North America yet. I'm sure it is available if I really searched. But there was a documentary on the revival of Company, like the gender bent revival of Company, that I have not actually been able to see yet.
Oh, Keeping Up with Sondheim or something.
Yes,
Yes, I managed to see about 10 minutes of it when it was on YouTube for like 2 days, and someone took it down, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll just have to wait. Sure. But that was pretty good. I do think, this one, because of who is making it, the legitimacy of it is, better.
Of course, I will always say it's not really a documentary, but it's those PBS things of him teaching kids how to sing his songs are so good. They're so brilliant.
That was the other thing I was going to mention. When Terry Finn...
Yeah, when he teaches her how to sing her song.
When she gets kind of choked up and talks about how wonderful he is as a teacher. I could just see him just kind of like... Because I go back to those quite a lot, especially when he's talking to the actor about... when he's talking about later. And he's just like, you can't do this. You have to... Yeah, they're so good. And that's really nice that we get so much of his teaching now.
My favorite moment of those are the not getting married today section where he almost falls out of his chair because he's leaning over so far. It's so fun.
Yeah.
He's so in it, and he's like almost going to topple out of his chair.
It's terrific. I have one more question.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. You recently closed the first Hat book.
I did.
And you're now, working on the second for, future seasons. To kind of quote Merrily in a way, did you imagine what this podcast would become when you first started making notes and the first season went out?
Yeah, this is a hard question to answer because, I mean, I don't want to make this seem like I was like, I'll just make a podcast and who knows what will happen. Like, I did have some intentionality and some hope that, like, maybe this will find an audience and maybe it'll grow and et cetera, et cetera. So there was definitely that intention behind it. I still am a little bit humbled and blown away by how far and wide the podcast has gone. For some reason in my head, I thought it was just going to stay within, America-ish, and maybe a little bit of the UK. But like, I'm not even joking when people reach out to me from like France and Spain and Germany and like Japan and just all over the world. I'm like, oh, I really did not think people were going to be listening to this. Literally, all across the world. So that's fun. I started very trepidatiously because as much as of a Sondheim fan as I was, like, I started saying very cheekily, you're self-described Sondheim expert. And I never really just thought I was an expert, which is why I was always waiting for someone else to make this show. Because like, they're going to be smarter and they'll be able to do this way better than I can. And then I just got impatient, like, well, fine, I'll do it myself. But I do feel like I've gotten like a deeper appreciation for his work as I've gone through it. And like the shows that I wasn't like super familiar with or like have a deep affinity for have now become like such like ingrained in me, like Pacific Overtures, even like Merrily that we just finished. It has grown, and not like I'm famous or anything from this. Like, I could, everyone always wants more than what they have, I think, at the end of the day. So it's like there's always something that I'm striving for. But I think that it's helped me clarify my thoughts on Sondheim as an artist. It's made me a deeper lover of his work. And hopefully some people along the way have enjoyed my journey through his body of work. But yeah, we're on to book 2 basically now.
Book 2. That is honestly so exciting. Absolutely. No, and by the way, I also want to mention that like the tool that this is, there's so much to learn. There's so much stuff to sing, huh? I for one, I'm very excited. Yeah, I'm very, very excited to see where it goes.
The other thing that I was not really anticipating with it going so wide is, like, again, the stable of guests that I have. Of course, I'm always looking for new guests each season too, but my core group that I can kind of rely on. I don't know if I never wanted to say something for someone else. If not friends, at least we are friendly with each other. So that's been nice to have too, about like this group of people that are scattered around the world that are just as nerdy as I am about this guy.
Absolutely.
So to wrap things up here, of course, there's a documentary about Merrily We Roll Along. Yeah. There is a actual film version of Merrily We Roll Along being made as we speak. My joke is that in 20 years we'll find out. I think it's more like 13 or 12 that we have to wait. But still, it's going to be a while before we actually have the opportunity to watch this movie. Like you mentioned already, the original Frank has been recast already after 2 years of filming. So Paul Mescal will be our new Frank, which is great. I love him. Do you have any sense? I don't know. I'm so curious about it because I'm hoping at the very least it's an interesting failure, just like Merrily We Roll Along was on stage. Nothing would be more disappointing than to wait so long and be like, kind of boring. You know, you want it to be either great or at least like that was a fascinating train wreck that I just watched.
Okay. I have things that I think I'd love to see, and then there's things that I'm like I can just see the tweet immediately of someone reviewing the movie and they were like, why didn't they use Rich and Happy? I can't believe they didn't use Rich and Happy. I feel like there's going to be a sequence in the movie. If they don't do the full graduation thing, they just do like a snippet of it, and it will be Frank giving his speech, cut to Charlie there as well. And behind him will be on the wall, and it will say like "Our Custodians" or something, and it'll be a picture of Hal Prince. It'll be George Firth and Stephen Sondheim. They'll be like there.
Oh, that'd be fun.
I am looking forward to it because this is a really unconventional musical to do for Stephen Sondheim. I thought we would have got, you know, a Pacific Overtures movie a lot sooner, or even
a Sunday movie. Honestly, I thought they
Sunday
would have tried.
Would be great. There's a great video by Howard Ho about why there should be a Sunday movie and how Spielberg should direct it.
Oh, interesting.
Which would be great to see, actually. But I don't think Spielberg's going to do another musical.
No.
I could make up my mind right now, and then by the time we get to it, I'll be like, I completely forgot what I was doing, what I said at the time, because be 13 or 14 years.
The thing with the movie, like the thing I kept coming back to, which I've stated like repeatedly throughout this season, is that like, there are certain sequences I think are tailor-made for a film, and why I think that a film might be the better medium for this story to live in. And especially because I think if you just think about even the original production, even though I know they're adapting the revised version, but if we think about the original version, and you can hear this on the album, like they really wanted you to see like the Frank as an old man confronting his younger self, especially in that final scene in The Hills of Tomorrow, which is so much easier to do in a film format. Absolutely. Even if you're just doing cross-cutting, and especially because they are filming it over such a long time, to see the younger version of a person and an older version of a person in the same frame and confronting that with the ghosts and everything of their past, I think that there's certain sequences that are going to be like, oh yeah, this is gonna hit. The fact of the matter is you're still confronted with the fact that there are sections I think of this story within this book that don't really work for me a whole heck of a lot. So I don't know if they're going to just iron those out or switch up the order. I don't know.
I definitely think they'll cut songs. They'll definitely, or
like edit them down a bit. Yeah.
I think the first thing that will go will be the transitions.
1,000%. There is no way. They might have one, but they'll have like a little musical cue, but there's no way they're coming out and singing transitions.
Like title card. I think the only one they'll keep.
Dun, 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 and then it's like we're into the next scene. Exactly. Like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. Fast cutting, and then we have the title cards. I think the only one that might stay will be in Bobby and Jackie and Jack, because it's line. Yeah, they'll probably cut down stuff. I mean, in 6 by Sondheim, we have a kind of we have an opening door sequence.
Yes.
Which is shot on a sort of green screen type thing, and the camera's moving around, and it is quite cool and it's nicely done. I don't know if we're going to get something like that, or it's going to be really snappy, and we're going to be cutting. We're going to have the like a classic 3 different shots on screen with a little line.
Oh yeah, right. Well, it's hard to say. Like, I mean, because the director, like Richard Linklater, has obviously done stuff with time before. There's the whole Before trilogy.
Oh yeah.
Which I know are separate films, but shot 9 years apart from one another. Boyhood was shot over a 10-year period.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And watching actual characters grow. This is a whole different beast. Like, he's such an interesting filmmaker because the only closest thing that he's done to this, in my opinion, is probably School of Rock. I'm so curious about why this is the project that he was passionate about to come aboard on. Like, does he have a take? Does he have an interest in this? Like, how is he framing these scenes? Because normally he does like a lot of long takes, which could still work 100% for certain scenes here.
Yeah.
Even in Opening Doors, you could have very long takes of it, just like having the camera move around. But is that what he's doing? Or is he going to rely a lot more on like special effects, practical effects, that sort of thing to like move the story along? That's my question. Is like, I just don't know how he's going to film this.
I was thinking about that actually, because obviously now AI and technology, I mean, we see things in like The Mandalorian or whatever, you know, the type of deepfake technology that was kind of out there that's very dangerous, but also I guess film is, you know, people are really using it to their advantage. You could have young Frank and old Frank, and you know, maybe when they shoot it in 13 years time, they're like, oh, I don't like that shot, can we just take a frame from about 13 years ago and put it in there? They can actually, you know. And I do have hopes. I do have high hopes for it, but it is it is an odd choice, especially of the Sondheim canon. You would have thought we would have had a different one.
I'm still holding out hope for Follies. Follies seems like the most obvious thing to make a movie out of, and yeah, it still has not happened.
I find, when I'm listening to the Bernadette Peters recording and the overture starts, I can just see the kind of, you know, the Dutch angles, and that it's in the the 20s and 30s, and then we cross cut to maybe the newspaper headlines of the Weissman Follies are doing this. And to be fair, that I think that's why the appeal of listening to Broadway cast recordings piqued my interest so much as a kid, because you can just see the visuals immediately, and you can read the story and then kind of infer, oh, maybe they're standing over there and doing this or whatever. That's actually why, and this is so stupid. This is actually ridiculous. But I resisted watching Hamilton for a very long time because I was really happy with the version I had in my head, so I didn't want to.
Oh, sure.
And then I saw it and went, oh no, actually that's very good. I mean, it's pretty
There's
good.
There's a turntable in this?
Yeah. That's not the one I imagined in my head. But I'm hopeful. Who knows? What if Baz Luhrmann does Anyone Can Whistle? Like, you know, something could happen.
I mean,
Ryan
if anyone
Johnson
can make it work, maybe it's Baz Luhrmann
or something, you know. But we just need more musical adaptations that kind of really lean into, this is a musical. We're not just, you know, I don't know. I think sometimes movie musicals are afraid to kind of really delve to be,
just lean in.
Yeah, and not cater to, oh, we have to be real. Has to be real. Like there's a universe out there where Tom Hooper does Passion, and I just don't know if I'm ready to think about that.
Watch me burn down my local theater. Okay. Yeah. So, Luke, thank you so much for joining me here today. If people did want to stay in contact with you or see what you're up to, what is the easiest way to do so online?
You can follow me at Crichton Music on Instagram and Twitter. You can check out my website, www.crimemusic.co.uk. I'm currently working on a few different bits and pieces, but, you know, drop me a message. I love working with new people. So, let's collaborate and chat. And even if it's just about Sondheim, I'm happy to chat.
Excellent. Thanks, Luke.
Thank you so much again, Kyle.
I've never seen rows of people leave.
Here was my chance to write about these heroes of mine.
Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to Story Hive, and to the Edmonton Community Foundation this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere that you get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we're going to be starting our mini-season, revisiting some of the songs that we've talked about on this show before. So, we're going to go to lunch with some ladies. Probably where a raincoat if you're next to Patty. As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.
You know, there's only a few moments in your life that are truly transcendent.
It was one of the better things that ever happened to me.